An Alberta politician has finally addressed the issue of wind turbines and their impact on health. That next on Wind Concerns. Hello, I'm Mark Mallet, Editor-in-Chief at Wind Concerns, and this is our first webcast, and I'm so happy to be joined by my colleague down in southern Alberta, Angela Tabak. Hey, welcome to Wind Concerns.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
Hey, before we get into our subject then, let's introduce a little bit to our readers who you are. You were like me probably several months ago. All of a sudden you got a letter in the mail saying that there is a planned industrial wind factory to be put in your neighborhood. And in your case, you live in one of the most beautiful parts of the country. I mean, we're beautiful up here in northern Saskatchewan, or Alberta rather, but you're down by Waterton National Park.
I am, yes. I live in I guess it's a village or a hamlet of Mountain View, which is 15 minutes from the front gate of Waterton National Park. So yeah, we're right there. And I actually didn't get a letter in the mail because although I will be very much personally affected by a project that's going up in this area or that has been proposed for this area, I live outside of the 800-meter boundary. So I was not privileged enough to get a letter. But yeah, back in February, we heard that this was happening in our area and that TransAlta was proposing a massive wind farm placed right between the Belly and the Waterton rivers, two major riparian areas in this area of the province. Yeah, we're looking at 47 Calgary Tower-sized turbines.
Right. And so
right outside the park.
Right outside Waterton National Park, which...
Yes, within 7 kilometers.
Right. Which is insane because we know studies have shown you can see wind turbines, and that study was probably done on smaller ones than the ones that they're planning there and here, but up to 50 kilometers and probably now greater because of the increasing size of turbines. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So what made you take up this fight then, even though you didn't get the letter?
Well, maybe I fell into it accidentally, if you can say that anything happens by accident. My husband and I moved to this area only 3 years ago. My husband is from Chicago. The choice was, do we live in Chicago? And it's a beautiful city, and he lived in a beautiful area of the city. We would have been perfectly fine there, very happy there. Or to come out here, where I was from, and to be closer to the mountains. And we chose here, just like so many other people have come to this area. They've chosen this area for a very specific reason. And for most people, it's the proximity to the mountains, it's the nature, it's the ruggedness, the rawness that we have here. It's undeveloped. Even though we have a national park, just a few minutes from our front door, we're generally undeveloped in this area. And so, I'd heard some neighbors talking about it and their concerns that they had received these letters. And so out of curiosity, we just happened to have a county meeting the next day. And so I just showed up at the meeting and I was just like, well, I want to know about this. Like, what do you know about it? And what can we do about it? And where do I get more information? And they were, they pointed me in the right direction. And we ended up having our first community meeting 2 days before TransAlta came and did their first public engagement meeting here to organize and to figure out who was going to do what and what information we needed.
Right. So basically, this is you're like our community where we were stunned to find out that here on the North Saskatchewan River, right at the top of the river, they want to put these, again, 200, I think it's now 205-meter turbines. Mm-hmm. And our concern is like yours. We're right in the migratory path of the endangered whooping crane. They actually use the area that they want to put these turbines in, they use them as summer grounds. But more than that, and this is when we want to get into this subject, more than that, we have both learned that around the world, people are reporting adverse health effects because of wind turbines. And it's not just the noise. I mean, as you heard at the top of the webcast, you can hear what a turbine sounds like. People down just south of us, about 30 miles from us, Angela, they say that these wind turbines sound like a jet engine hovering above their homes. So this is, of course, on a windy day. But I mean, this is unbelievable to have that kind of sound next to your home. But the real concern is actually what has to do with what is called infrasound. Now, this is the spectrum of the sound you can't hear. And it's when the turbine passes by the base of the turbine, it creates these infrasonic pulsations that you can feel, but you can't hear. And what is so scary about this, Angela, and I know you've seen the documentary Downwind about what's happening in Ontario. People are reporting side effects like nausea, dizziness, heart irregularity, and on to the point where they have been driven, literally driven from their homes. And this is what is happening around the world. Courts are now starting to recognize this. They're calling it wind turbine syndrome. This was identified by Dr. Nina Pierpont with a PhD back in 2009. She's been mocked as kind of a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but no, this is true. This is backed up in science. It's backed up in acoustology studies. It's backed up now in what we're seeing in the courts. And this is scary stuff, Angela.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And Mark, you definitely know more about these types of things than I do, as you've done a little bit more research into that. But this is something that we have brought up, that our community group has brought up to TransAlta. I've had a number of folks forward me, responses that they've received from TransAlta as they've written to them and said, hey, what about the human health concerns? We're seeing these different studies coming from all over the world. What do you have to say to that? Their only response has been a link to a page on the Canadian government website, or they basically say, we follow the Canadian government's health recommendations when it comes to turbines. And here's a link to a study that was done back in I think it's 2010 or 2011. Well, we've got 12 or 13 or 14 years of experience now from all around the globe. The research has been done and is being done, and we need our government officials to pay attention to that and to be using the most up-to-date information when it comes to regulating these giant renewable wind turbine projects.
That's well said, Angela. And the study you're referring to is the Health Canada study, and that has been deeply panned by many people in the acoustics industry, especially by the people in Ontario who are experiencing these health effects. And the study basically said there needs to be more studies, but they did conclude that there is an annoyance to people. But, the World Health Organization actually updated their guidelines in 2018, and those guidelines basically say that wind turbines now are among the chief concerns of health effects. Now, listen, Health Canada might call it annoyance, which tends to minimalize it. But if you have a dripping tap while you're trying to get to sleep, does that annoy you? Does that disturb your sleep? Now imagine a jet engine sound outside your window, or in the infrasonic realm of these pulsations that you're feeling, that you can sense, that you can't hear them, but you can feel them. And so it's just well said what you just said. There needs to be an update, and the provinces need to get with it. Now, listen, the wind turbine industry will continually cite and deny anything. They'll tell you flat out that there's no evidence that this harms people. And as I have said recently in one of my articles, Angela, either they're lying or they're invincibly ignorant, because it's in the courts now, and it's impossible that these wind industries wouldn't be aware that the courts are now ruling in the favor of victims who themselves or their animals have been adversely impacted. And actually, go ahead, Angela. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I hate to say it, but when it comes to something like this, it's always follow the money. Who stands to benefit from these projects coming up? Is it the local people, the local communities, or is it these large energy companies coming in? And so, yeah, it doesn't surprise me that they'd be denying that.
Yeah, they're denying that. They're also denying that another issue, which is huge. We'll get into that, I think, on another webcast, but is property values as well drop. I mean, I can't believe it, but I've just heard recently a submission to the Alberta Utilities Commission, the AUC, who makes the decision on approving these things, Angela. And the submitter basically said that there's no evidence that property values drop. And we have the evidence, but even common sense would tell you when you put up a wind turbine that's a fifth of a kilometer high behind somebody's house, and not just one, but we're talking sometimes 40 to 50, that's not going to affect your property value. I tell you I don't believe that. And
No.
common sense will tell you, of course, property values will drop.
Oh, Mark, I just received a letter this morning from a local realtor who detailed basically what has happened to her business in the Hill Spring area since this was announced. You can't deny it. That's the reality of the situation. So,
Yeah, and yeah, that confirms also another realtor up in Smoky Lake who has also said that she or he is having a difficult time now selling homes just with the announcement of a potential project. This is before the project is even built. So this is the kind of rubbish, though, isn't it, that you and I are seeing in this whole push for wind industry. There's a lot of lying. There's a lot of false information. There's a lot of industry-funded studies that whitewash everything, and that's what they always refer to. That's what they bring before the AUC. But we've got tons of evidence now. And we're going to fight right to the very end with this, even if we have to go to court, because the evidence is clear. Industrial wind turbines affect human health. They affect property values. They affect the environment. We'll get into that in other webcasts. And they destroy nature. And I just, honestly, Angela, I can't believe they want to put these up in our area or in front of Waterton National Park. I mean, what are we doing to our province?
well, and it's absurd. So I'm involved in the tourism business. I run a bed and breakfast. And so we get guests from all around the world. And this summer, I mean, what you just said, about it being absurd and that just really came home to roost at my kitchen table. We had two young men from Germany who had spent the last 2 months driving across Canada. They started in Newfoundland and they were driving towards the West Coast. And so they stayed at our place for a couple of days. It was a really great experience. But when we told them about this, now, they're from Germany, so we all know what's happened to Germany in the last year or two with their energy and the situation that they're dealing with there. When I told them and I pointed from my back deck, I said, that's where they're going to be, jaw dropping. And they said, we've just driven across Canada. It is empty. Why would they put them here? And I feel the same way about your area, Mark. You know what? I grew up in northern Alberta. I know the beauty of that area. Why?
Yeah.
Why are they choosing these particular areas? The wind blows everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So how have we gotten to this point where there's just no forethought about anything? So yeah, I mean, with our group, we've really focused on, okay, this is not the right place. But as I get further and further into this, and talking to folks such as yourself, I'm not convinced any longer that there's any right place for these projects.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. We've been in touch with Sherry Lang from Ontario, was a major leader in bringing about the moratorium that was declared there by Premier Doug Ford. That is still in effect, although we're hearing that it's becoming shaky because of the pressure coming from probably the federal government as well as all the money that's out there. And you're absolutely right about the money. But why? Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you. Why would you put these things in such beautiful areas? and right among people's residences, and there's other places in this province where you can do it, but there's probably a couple answers. I know in our area there's already an existing transmission line that they can tap into, but we say, so what? That doesn't give you the right to destroy the North Saskatchewan River Valley view in this area, or the entrance to the Waterton National Park. It doesn't make sense, other than that we're seeing this tremendous push and greed because the industry, as has been said so many times, it's not driven by wind, it's driven by subsidies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a complicated issue, that's for sure. And we are always asking, like, where are you getting the money to do this? Like, how are you getting paid? Where is the payoff? And we never get a straight answer in dealing with TransAlta.
Well, we know on the offshore wind industry is collapsing, which is good because there's at the same time that they're doing this, now whales are showing up dead. I mean, so on the onshore turbine projects, we're finding dead birds, eagles, huge migratory birds, and a lot of people, they've tried to counter that and say, oh well, cats kill birds far more than wind turbines, but cats don't kill eagles. Eagles kill cats. So we're talking about a major destruction of them and of bats and so on, and we'll get into that in another webcast. But listen, this is the important thing that is I consider breaking news, and that is that our MLA up here in Bonnyville, St. Paul Cold Lake, Scott Sear, has come out with a letter he submitted to the AUC on November 29th. That's the Alberta Utilities Commission, who again makes the decision on approving these wind projects. And he went into a detailed letter, and for the first time that I have seen from a Canadian politician, that doesn't mean that there isn't others, but it's the first I'm aware of, we have a Canadian politician who has come out and identified the human health effects and impacts on wind turbines. And let me go to what he said in his submission, and I think this is significant. He said that studies and court decisions have highlighted, did I mention his name? This is Scott Sear again, the MLA. You can see him there in the photo. I have met with Scott. I have discussed these things with him and brought them to his attention. I didn't know Scott was planning this letter, but it's a tremendous letter. And let me mute my phone so that never happens again. This is what Scott said. Studies and court decisions have highlighted serious negative health effects for people residing within up to 10 kilometers of wind turbine plants, primarily due to noise emissions. And note he puts noise in parentheses because it involves not just the audible but the inaudible spectrum. Scott Sear says these health concerns, along with the potential for negative external effects on local communities, add another dimension to the renewable energy debate. I mean, this is huge. You're talking about you not getting a letter because you weren't within 800 meters.
Right.
Scott is identifying the science on this. And now I tried to reach him beforehand, before this webcast, to make a clarification, because when Scott cites this reality, he linked to a Finnish pilot study in Finland that was in 2019. And that study concluded that the harmful or severe symptoms were clearly more common, less than or about 15 kilometers from wind turbines than further away. So we know for a fact now that wind turbines are creating severe symptoms up to 15 kilometers away from the turbine plants. And we also know that the bigger the turbines now, according to another study, that the greater the health effects they are. And I want to note that when it comes to animals, Angela, it's not just human beings, it's animal health as well. And there's a major study that came out showing health effects in countries all over the world that are creating birth defects in cattle, mutagenic, teratogenic impacts, so mutations. We have heard stories of health impacts such that milk production has lessened in cattle, chickens stopped laying. We had at one of our wind meetings, Angela, a woman stand up from Ontario who left Ontario to get away from the wind turbines, moved to our community only to find now that there's a proposed project. And she said she has 10 mares that she was breeding in Ontario. And when the wind turbines went online, all 10 of her mares went sterile. They could no longer breed. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's happening to animals, and God knows really what's happening to people other than what we're hearing from Ontario. Again, nausea, headaches, to the point they're just literally driven from their homes.
Mark, that is just absolutely nuts. When I think about a 15-kilometer radius from this particular project, that will take in Hillspring, Glenwood, Mountain View, those three villages right there. We are in the heart of cattle country, of ranching country. We have ranches that have been, you drive down the road and you see, they've got a sign that says established in 1895 type of thing, that have been in these families for the last 130 years, 120 years, what have you. And I just think, I'm thinking we've got a dairy right there within 3 kilometers of the project. We've got a giant chicken farm, all these ranches with all these cattle, plus all the people that live there as well.
Yeah.
Like that just, when I think about that's just downright scary.
It is downright scary. And I was just contacted by a woman in Alberta in the Castor region where there is a wind turbine farm. She said to me she's having all these symptoms. And we have to keep in mind that a lot of people who live among these turbines don't say anything. And one of the reasons is they've signed a non-disclosure agreement. If they say anything negative, the wind turbine company can go after them. And so I tell you, so these contracts, I think, were penned in hell. And we'll get into that maybe on another webcast about what this takes away from the rights of landowners. And we've got landowners who are contacting us, telling us they deeply regret, Angela, having signed the contract, that they didn't read the book and they should have read it all. And now they have deep regrets. But
we're seeing the same thing. We've had a number of people. I mean, I have seen contracts. Technically, I'm not supposed to have seen these contracts because it's in the contract that is not to be shown to anybody. Which right there is a giant red flag. But I've seen these contracts, and we could do a whole webcast just on the contracts and how they get people to sign them.
That's absolutely right. Well, let's get back to this this letter again from Scott Sear. And just to clarify, Scott used the number 10 kilometers, but he linked to the Finnish study, which is 15 kilometers. So I have reached out to him. And unfortunately, before this webcast, he wasn't able to get back to me. I'm still waiting to hear from him as to why he went with 10 and not 15. But what we are asking for, and it's urgent, is that our government, right now, we're in a renewable energy pause. This was declared earlier this summer. The AUC has paused approving these projects until February 29th, 2024. After that date, because right now they're still processing applications for wind and solar and other renewable projects. After that date, they can start approving. So right now, the urgency is right now, Angela, that they have to get legislation in place. And this isn't rocket science. They don't need a ton of lawyers to do this, to declare that you cannot place these wind turbines any longer within 15 kilometers of where people live or where they work. We're calling on the government to do this. In fact, we're calling on more, Angela. We're calling them for a moratorium on wind turbines. They don't make sense on every level, economic, environmentally, and then health-wise with animals and so on. So there's an urgency right now.
Oh, there's absolutely an urgency. And, I want to say, I 100% support our Premier, Danielle Smith, and her team and their willingness to put that pause. I mean, the pressure that they have been under from the industry, from those who, I guess they truly believe that there's a climate crisis and that This is the way out, is to have these wind turbines scattered all across the province. They've been under a ton of pressure, and as the residents of Alberta, especially rural Alberta, who have been subjected to these projects, who have had these companies come into their communities, and it's very divisive. It's a terrible thing for a community, especially these small communities, to have to deal
Yeah.
with. I've had people, we're talking about nausea and all those different health effects. I've had people come to me and say, the very thought of this is affecting my mental health.
Yeah.
That they've been wringing their hands since February, wondering what's going to happen to their property values, to their health, to their animals, to their lifestyle. It's horrendous. And so I completely applaud
Yeah.
Danielle Smith and Rebecca Scholes and the other ministers who are all involved in this, who have had the guts to say, hey, we need to get this right. And I am just hoping and praying that they do, that they know that they've got the backing of rural Albertans,
Yeah.
and that they can make these hard decisions that have to be made for the good of Albertans, for those who have been asked and who have been forced to make these sacrifices for so long,
Yeah.
out in the rural areas. And yeah, I mean,
So well said.
good for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to concur with you. I absolutely agree. I'm not in the habit of applauding politicians because there's been so little to applaud in recent years. But I really think Danielle Smith is doing a fantastic job. She's under immense pressure from ideologists who start right in the federal government. Minister Guilbeault has completely lost his mind, and I'm not saying that to be disrespectful, but when he's talking about implementing the kind of net zero expectations and so on, he's literally putting people's lives in risk if we were to follow through with that. And our premier is boldly standing up against that. But back to our subject. Premier Danielle Smith has also come out and identified, as Scott Sear did, the issues of wrecking our landscapes, of using up prime agricultural farmland, and these wind turbine plants take up huge amounts of acres. And now we're just at the point where we're trying to get our premier to acknowledge also, not saying she doesn't know, and I'm sure she does, but to acknowledge the health effects. And we're asking Minister Rebecca Schultz and Minister Adriana, I forget her, is it Lagrange? Forgive me if I forget her last name. But
yeah, so she's health. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're asking them to consider the science, to look at the studies. And man, I'll tell you, we're told thousands of people in Ontario have submitted their testimonies. This was put in a dossier and given to Premier Doug Ford. You're absolutely right, Angela. The people in my community are terrified. And I wake up in the morning and I go out and I look out my window, and my first thought is, thank you, God, for this beauty. And then I remember every single morning that I'm fighting these wind turbines, and I'm horrified that they would dare to put these in an area where there's people. I've moved to the country to be in the country. I choose to forego the benefits of living in the city, the convenience and so on, and to live out here, to have this life, to raise my family. And there's many farmers, generational farmers, who've dedicated their lives to raising cattle so that the city dwellers can have beef and dairy. And these are the people who are going to be bearing the brunt of this. And yes, they're terrified. They're sick about it. Every time I see them in the store and they recognize me, they say, how's the fight going? I mean, this is really terrible what's happening. And it's time. Look, Premier Doug Ford declared a moratorium. Angela, yeah. I don't see why our province can't. And I think that they're not talking about it right now because of the pressure out there, the pressure from the ideologues and so on, that make them look like they're somehow, against the planet or destroying the planet. But it's the exact opposite. bringing in the wind turbines destroys the planet. It destroys millions of bats, thousands and thousands of key species in birds. It destroys the soil. It kills. It drives away earthworms. I mean, these are all things that we have on our website in studies. I mean, it's got to stop.
Yeah.
And at the very
I
least,
totally agree.
At the very least, declare a 15-kilometer zone around humans.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I don't want to fault anybody who truly believes, you know, that the planet is in crisis and that they want to help. But it can't be done at the cost of human life. It can't be an anti-human approach. And so, yeah, when we see these companies that are just coming into the community and saying, hey, we're putting these up, this is the way it is. And the cost that will be paid by the people who live there, like as we've laid out already, as you've laid out so well, Mark, you know, all the different problems, that's not a solution. If you really believe that there's a problem, that is not a solution. There are other solutions. There are other ways that we can do this, that we can care for the planet properly. Yes, we have a stewardship. Absolutely. Yeah. We have to step up and do that. But that's exactly what you and I are doing and what members of our community are doing, where we're saying, no, this is a problem. And, you know, this isn't a NIMBY situation. I get accused of that all the time. No, this is not a NIMBY situation. This is let's look at the reality of NIMBY where means, they want to put these.
Sorry, NIMBY means, for those who don't know, means not in my backyard. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't about not in my backyard. It's not. And Mark, your group has definitely taken a very holistic approach, I would say, to looking at all the different research and all the different reasons that these things don't belong in anybody's backyard. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely.
So that's not the situation. It's let's look at the reality. Let's look at what the studies are telling us. Let's look at the individual reality of the individual areas where they want to bring these in. You know, you're in northern Alberta, I'm in southern Alberta. It's a very large province. We have different geography. We have different, you know, maybe different reasons for opposing this. Maybe our economies will be affected differently, whatever. But so each area needs to be looked at very carefully. Like what is the reality? How will this project affect all these different factors in these different areas? Yeah. Right now, we have like a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's why I very much support the government in putting a pause and looking at the regulations and saying, okay, what needs to change? Because having been fighting this since February and I didn't know anything about it beforehand, I had no reason to really care, I guess. And that's on me. But now, you know, I've been forced to kind of look into this. And I mean, I've never been one to sit down and read legislation, but I've had my head in the books for, 10 months now looking at this. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we need to get this right. Like the legislation around and the regulations around these types of projects was so lacking, completely lacking. So again, really, really glad to hear Scott Sears coming out and talking about it. Really, really glad to see that we have a pause, that we have an opportunity to make this right. And I cannot say it strongly enough. We've got to get this right.
So well said, because right now we're at the beginning. Not to say that there isn't already wind existing in the province. Unfortunately, there is. But we're poised at a point right now with all of the billions that have been, or millions or whatever, that have been pushed into this from around the globe and from our own federal government. We see that we are on the verge of these wind energy companies. Amazon, for instance, just announced they want to come into Alberta. What does Amazon, this American corporation, want to do with Alberta? Well, we're an open market here. We're a free market. And so they just look at us as a bonanza. But it's being done on the backs of ranchers, acreage owners. And you know what? It's going to affect the city people. When the city people want to go to the lakes and they want to get away to the national parks, they're going to have to drive through this. And those beautiful views that they dream about will be destroyed for generations. We've got to get this right. You're absolutely right, Angela. Now is the time. We've got the premier who can do it. We've got the premier who's got enough strength and backbone to stand up against this. And she just needs to hear from those of us who are doing the research. Like you, I'm having to read legislation. This has become a part-time job. And yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, we're not getting paid for anything we're doing, including this webcast. We don't get a cent from any of this. But we're doing it for our fellow Albertans, those in the city who want to move to the countryside, who want to enjoy our landscapes, and most certainly for our neighbors who are sick to their stomachs that anyone would dare to put up something like this, a fifth of a kilometer high in the sky, behind their farms and so on. I have no words for it anymore. It's got to stop. It's got to end. Well, listen, Angela, there's so much more that you and I could say, but I think we've covered the main subjects today, which is we really wanted to look at what Scott Sear has done. And really, hats off to Scott Sear. He's stepping out into the firing zone, but he's absolutely right. And I wish I could, maybe we'll try and publish his whole letter on Wind Concern's website, but Scott has dozens of footnotes throughout his letter. It's an evidence-based letter based in science declaring why wind turbines really need to be pushed away, if not, and he didn't say it, but if not a moratorium on them.
Perfect. And we need more of our representatives, our politicians, to step up and do the same thing. Definitely.
We need our municipal politicians also to start defending their municipalities and stop throwing their hands up in the air and saying, "Oh, well, we can't do anything. The AOC will override us." Well, they need to start screaming and shouting that we don't want to turn our rural communities and farmland into wind turbine junkyards.
Oh, you know what? Let me tell you, Mark. Pincher Creek. So the MD of Pincher Creek. Now, I heard this the other day. I have not checked it out myself, so it may need some fact checking. But it's my understanding that the MD of Pincher Creek holds 75% of all wind projects in the province right now. It's an absolute littered mess when you go up there. It's 45 minutes from my home. And in fact, if I drive 10 minutes any direction from my home, I can see wind farms. Yeah. Anyways, they understand. We have had more support from them, even though this project is proposed in the Cardston County. We have had more support from the MD of Pincher Creek in fighting this because they know exactly what we're about to get into. And they know, 20, 30 years ago, oh no, we're only starting with one little Cowley Ridge, and it was so innovative, and it was seen as just this wonderful progressive innovation, and they put up these turbines on Cowley Ridge, and of course they didn't stay there. It just ballooned, and they just spread further and further and further, and
it's like a cancer.
Oh, it's like a cancer, but in the MD of Pincher Creek, they know. And so you're right. Like, we need the municipalities, and we need the municipalities who have been there, done that, to start speaking up real loud and clear and kind of calling out the warning that you guys don't want to go there. Yeah, sure. The tax revenue that the counties get, pretty lucrative. I'll admit it. I can see why they would be tempted to go that way.
Yeah.
But, once these projects are up, they're up.
They're up.
And once you've lost that viewscape or that farmland or whatever, it's gone. We're not making more viewscapes. We're not making more mountains. We're not making more rivers. We're not making more agricultural land. So these things need to be protected.
So well said. Well, on that note, Angela, thank you for joining me. This is the first of many webcasts until we bring this scourge on this province to an end. And we hope and pray it'll be sooner than later. We've got 3 months until this pause ends. 3 months for our politicians to put an end to this. And again, we encourage you to write your MLA, write your municipality leaders, write the mayors of your towns, and above all, write the ministers in government and our premier and tell them, stop. Stop this now. Angela, thank you for joining me. We look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much. It'll be wonderful.
All right.